My name is Nicole Bernier. I'm a journalist and beekeeper, and I started a candle company called the Hive Lives. I've always loved the smell of beeswax candles. It's honey and honeycomb and whatever flowers the bees have been feeding on, instead of petroleum and perfume that's in most store candles. But I wasn't thinking about candles when I started beekeeping. I wanted to learn how to handle the bees and help support the population that's decreasing because of colony collapse. When I brought home my first package of bees, that's 10,000 bees in each box, there was a steep learning curve. I had to learn to be calm when I'm surrounded by more bees than I'd ever seen in one place. I went to bee school, and it was like peeking inside the glass walls of an ant farm. The honeybee society is so complex. The queen lays about 2,000 eggs a day, and the workers do all the foraging and taking care of her. She's the hub of a colony for up to 3 years before passing the torch, if she can get them through the winter. When I started making candles from the leftover beeswax, I was curious about making something different from the candles we usually see out there, and it struck me that beautiful old bottles would make great shapes for candles. I experimented with casting techniques and settled on a kind of liquid silicone that's used a lot in theater props. I learned which shapes and textures of bottles worked in molds better than others, and I had some spectacular fails. It was not an inexpensive hobby. But I learned how to position a wick in the best place, how to pour hot wax, and how to deal with leaks that covered my kitchen floor, and how to unmold and trim the candles and work with the natural variations in the wax, because every one is just a little different every time. I got curious about where the bottles came from, all those fancy embossed names of pharmacies and tonics that were someone's lifeblood 150 years ago. I'm a journalist, so my brain is always digging, and I found stories behind each of the bottles. There were tiny bottles of opium with different textured sides for soldiers or civilians. There was a popular dairy farmer in western Massachusetts who published poetry on the side, and a singing group of sisters with hair down to the floor who performed at Barnum and Bailey Circus and at the World Fair and sold bottles of hair fertilizer. There was a Vermont doctor who sold a concoction of bitters and whose home was the last stop on the Underground Railroad before Canada. And my favorite, a young man who just wanted to be a door-to-door salesman like his father, but he had to convince the company to let him on because he had cerebral palsy. He walked his 8-mile route every day for decades and became the highest-grossing salesman in the entire Western Division. His story caught the attention of actor William H. Macy, who wrote a screenplay about him, and it won 6 Emmy Awards. I wrote these stories on cards and packaged them up with the candles I gave as holiday gifts for family and friends and teachers. The people told me they were touched by the stories, by the themes of family businesses and perseverance and protest, and even a landmark legal case for friendship, and they wanted to give them as gifts themselves. So I launched a website, and I kept finding new bottles and new corners of history, all these people who existed and whose names are on candles in an era they couldn't possibly imagine. And I make the candles one by one for people who appreciate the bees and the shapes and the stories.